All right, let's kick this off, everybody. Hey, thanks for coming to my talk, Championing the GraphQL Client in the Modern Platform. First, what is this talk, really? It's an attempt to examine a tool that has served UI developers for a while, the GraphQL Client. Define what a GraphQL client actually is, sort of from first principles, and put it in the context of modern GraphQL adoption trends. Later on, I'll get specific about how you can empower application developers to use their GraphQL client, with a particular focus on the early days. And last, I'll share how our team of open source GraphQL client developers at Apollo stays close to users so we can be your partner on this journey. I think there's something in this talk for everyone, whether you're brand new to GraphQL, a seasoned web or mobile app developer, or anyone who's curious about how GraphQL fits into the modern development picture and what it means for your team. Okay, so the down arrow goes to the next one for the next person. All right, so hi, I'm Jeff Auriemma, at Jeff Auriemma on social media, on Twitter specifically, and I work at Apollo. I serve the open source engineers behind Apollo Client, Apollo iOS, and Apollo Kotlin, the most downloaded GraphQL client libraries in TypeScript, Swift, and Kotlin, respectively. I'm also proud to represent Apollo on the GraphQL Foundation's governing board, and I enjoy baking for my family, friends, and coworkers. There's a photo of my family eating at an ice cream and donut shop, which is not as delicious as it actually sounds, but we had a good time anyway. And here are some of my bakes, and I can't take credit for the staging on this one. That's all my colleague Martin, who adorned it with Android and the Android crocheted person there and the delicious-looking treats around it. So staging is all his. And there are some GraphQL and Apollo-themed macarons from a couple of seasons ago there. So a little about me. And allow me to introduce you. That is, my assumptions about you is that you showed up here, which probably means you care a lot about GraphQL. You have an interest in advocating for it. But can I get a sense of who's in the room, though? Are you like front end, full stack web dev? Are you mobile dev? Are you manager? You can shout out. It's fine. Sorry, it's one of those talks. You just, yeah, go ahead. You front end, full stack. Any mobile folks, too? Mobile, all right. Any platform, all right, awesome. And managers in the house, anybody? It's okay if you don't want to raise your hand. But I'm with you there. Awesome. Yes. OK, cool. Thank you. That helps. I see we have a mix in the room, which is what I was hoping for. All right. Cool. There will be more shouting out later. So if you feel like you want to shout, yeah, there you go. Well, I'd like to talk to you about typewriters for a moment. Bear with me. Can anyone identify this? I used to be a teacher, so this is just a moment for me right now. Quizzing you. You can shout out, it's fine. A keyboard, that's true. Can we get more specific, too? What? Somebody said QWERTY? Yeah. QWERTY, yeah, exactly. QWERTY, yeah. What about this one? Yes, Dvorak. Yes, that's right, all right. Yeah, I wouldn't know this. I couldn't pick this one out of a lineup, but Wikipedia told me. Anybody know what this one is? Anybody from France? Yes. I heard it's called Azerty. Is that the correct pronunciation? All right, there you go. My colleague Martin, who's the same one who decorated that gingerbread house, uses Azerty, but learned QWERTY to be on stage at a conference a year ago when he was pair programming with an Irish programmer, showcasing something. So he learned QWERTY just for that so they could share a keyboard, which is my favorite fun story about Martin, and there's many of them. Which do you use? QWERTY, OK. Any non-QWERTY folks in the house? Yeah?
QWERTY US International.
OK, there you go. OK, so like a variant, right? Yeah. Cool. Who decided you'd use QWERTY? Mavis speaking. That's my answer, too. Yeah, I mean, that's a short answer, right? I mean, does anybody like customize their keyboard, like the letters on it? I'm not talking like remapping caps lock for escape for you Vim folks out there. Like, do you switch the K and the Q so that typing GraphQL is easier? No? You've customized?
I use a 40% layout, but still QWERTY, but yeah.
You're down to 40%. Wow. I have to take a photo of that.
It's probably 60%.
OK, yeah, I think I use a 60 or 61, yeah. But yeah, but the letter layout, is it still like QWERTY, or are you?
There's no numbers or other modifier keys, so there's three layers in the firmware that you have to use mapping keys to like access certain characters.
That is so cool. That has not come up in our one-on-ones, but it's awesome. So cool. Everyone's different, and my assumption that is for that most people who use a keyboard, who use QWERTY, it's a matter of convention or convenience, right? This stuff was figured out. You have more important things to do than optimizing for the location of the letter Q, right? But the story behind QWERTY is instructive, I think, and it starts with the invention of the typewriter itself. Scholes is the person who's usually credited with this, along with 2 other collaborators. And they created the basics, including keyboard layouts. Now, the early versions were kind of outlandish. You saw it on the previous slide. They looked almost like piano keyboards or organ keyboards. But eventually, Scholes and company landed on a design that resembled the modern layout. And the reason why Scholes arrived at this layout are actually kind of speculative. There's a lot of apocryphal history around it, but a lot of folks agree that generally the design considerations included the possibility of mechanical failure. So frequently pressed keys couldn't be put next to each other because it would jam. Or early feedback from telegraph operators, which were sort of the first users. There was also patent concerns apparently, patent infringement, so you couldn't, I'm not sure what those were. I'm fascinated by it. And salesmanship, just there's some apocryphal stories about if all the keys on the top row could be made to type one word or something like that. I don't know. The important thing, though, is that they settled on this on an early version of QWERTY. Then their patents were sold to a manufacturer, Remington, who further refined the layout closer to what we know today as QWERTY. And Remington hired and trained a bunch of typists on that layout to show customers how productive these machines could be, how productive these typewriters could be. Sort of an early developer relations motion, if you will. And their Remington 2 model was the smash hit. That was the thing that was so widely used and imitated in the growing typewriter market that QWERTY quickly became the de facto way to type. And survived the leap in the 20th century to teletype and then computers with some platform-specific accommodations. And that's why most of us end up using QWERTY, mostly unquestioningly, although clearly there are some enthusiasts out there who definitely put a little more thought into that. But a lot of us just kind of take QWERTY and use it unquestioningly. And I want you to think about GraphQL adoption in sort of a similar way, because there's a future where GraphQL is a no-brainer, where software engineers consider GraphQL clients as being almost akin to QWERTY. Right? It's the first thing that touches their hands when they sit down to write their UIs, and it's ubiquitous and trusty. And all those seeds have been planted. So as a thought exercise, I'll pose the same question to you. Think about the first time you used GraphQL in production on your teams or whatever. Who decided that you'd use GraphQL? Maybe it was you, maybe it was not, but I want you to think about or speculate as to why you or that person chose it. And this talk is for those who want to be or continue being that person, that decider, that champion for GraphQL. Because just as the success of QWERTY and the success of typewriters are inextricable, so too are the success of GraphQL client libraries and GraphQL itself. I realize many of us here at GraphQL Conf today are savvy and get GraphQL clients, probably better than I do. But these talks are recorded, and some newcomers may find this talk on the internet later on. So I do want to start from first principles, and hopefully I can present these ideas in a way that's sufficiently kind of novel to keep all of you kind of engaged for the next few minutes. And I'd like to start that out by talking about doing network requests, data fetching kind of before GraphQL came along and came on the scene. Data fetching was largely naive on the client side. You made a network call. Maybe you used a language or platform primitive like HTTP URL connection in Java, or a wrapper like jQuery Ajax on the web back in the XHR days. If you were in a type-safe language, you probably hand-rolled some models. You anticipated null values. You did your error handling, control flow there, and you were off to the races getting your data into your UI. A lot of the fun stuff, a lot of the interesting parts about making things more performant and things like that were done on the server. Now, you can still do that with GraphQL, right? At the end of the day, your GraphQL server is giving you JSON data. You can do with it what you will. Nothing fundamental breaks about this. You can go make a post request with whatever, Alamo Fire in your iOS app, pass it a GraphQL document, and boom, you got GraphQL in your app. But early GraphQL tooling, particularly Relay, Apollo Client, Apollo iOS, Apollo Kotlin, back then was called Apollo Android, leveraged some of the best aspects of the GraphQL language to create a much more robust set of tools for the UI developers. The schema gave us all type safety for all the data and operations in our API. And the type name meta field gave us a JSON encodable way to communicate type information to client sides. And they established the common elements of GraphQL clients, sort of our version of QWERTY. And it turns out that these elements together rounded out the UI developers toolkit in a real way across platforms. This is a little something I cooked up earlier in the year. It's my attempt at a cheeky representation of the standard kind of GraphQL client feature set, sort of the panoply of all of that. And I know there are like minimalist GraphQL clients that make principal decisions not to do some of these things, and that's okay. I just wanted to kind of lay out sort of a pretty wide selection of what you can find in modern GraphQL clients. And I want to walk through all the levels of this hierarchy real quick. And I'm curious whether you'd categorize it differently, because this is very much in the eye of the beholder, and I'm not going to pretend that this is some authoritative statement about where like your esteem belongs in GraphQL. Okay, so it's more just for fun and maybe to get you thinking about GraphQL clients in perhaps a new way. So at the bottom of the pyramid is sort of like the base stuff. It's the stuff that's closest perhaps to the language or framework or platform that you're working on top of. We're talking about like making network requests and handling responses, parsing GraphQL documents, making them into like ASTs and things like that. Using JSON and understanding multiple protocols. All of those things are kind of built into the pyramid, right? They're the thing upon which all of this stands. The next level up, I call it safety. Basically, like, can you use it in such a way that is predictable, right? That you feel will build confidence going into production. So we're talking about like using the GraphQL type system to go into native types and models, usable, robust documentation. I think that this is always something we can invest more into. Unit test abstractions, GraphQL network error APIs, nullability, all of these different things that make you kind of use GraphQL and have confidence that you're covering your team and your user as you go into production. Love and belonging, developer experiences love, for sure. Elegant and idiomatic APIs with opinions and conventions, integrating into common frameworks and libraries, and an active developer community. I think all of these are really the next level up, things that GraphQL clients provide via their communities and via where they meet. Esteem, this was the one that was most abstract for me. I kind of stretched to this one, but I wonder if you agree. Normalized caching or caching out of the box for optimal performance and fetching, doing optimistic updates and abstractions for network transforms, including Apollo Link and Interceptor. There's also the Urkel exchange and the relay network layer. And on top, we have this self-actualization piece. I think this is where the ecosystem and extensibility of GraphQL clients really comes to bear. There are a lot of GraphQL clients out there, and there are a lot of ways to express things in whatever language or platform you're building for. And so having that API for plugins, having that GraphQL community buy-in, having the community buy-in of your chosen language or framework, and thoughtfully integrated into those platform tooling bits. And so those together is like my version of Maslow's hierarchy of GraphQL client developer needs or something. And I want to reemphasize how much joy kind of this feature set has brought into the hands of people building applications. And it drove so much GraphQL hype for so long. I'm curious, too, if anybody has anything to add to this, or if that resonated for you at all. Is there anything that you'd add to that list? Seeing a bunch of like no's. I'm assuming that means it's perfect. Let's ship it. All right, great. Today, application developers largely and generally know about GraphQL. Awareness is pretty high. I'm thinking back to the Gartner hype cycle curve that Lee shared this morning. Awareness is high among application developers. But the frontier has shifted to API developers and platform engineers. This is the segment of the user base that is on the curve of discovering things like federation as a solution for API sprawl, as you'll hear about throughout this conference. Even Roy's talk before just touched upon this. And that segment will be learning about GraphQL clients as they drive their organizations to get on the graph. Remember, QWERTY didn't become ubiquitous just because someone thought it was a good idea. There are plenty of good ideas that don't become ubiquitous. It became ubiquitous because Remington went out there, talked to typists, and people who they thought could become typists, and validated what they were building. They proved it out and tried to bring it to them, meaning they supported the needs of their users at the time. And that is the essence, I think, of platform engineering. It's a discipline that is about supporting the needs of software developers within an organization. And it is through platform engineers that GraphQL clients will continue their proliferation in the developer community. There's this new shift in GraphQL adoption patterns, and anyone who wants to be a GraphQL champion needs to understand this reality. There's outside-in adoption driven by product engineers, and then there's inside-out adoption driven by platform engineers. I'm willing to bet that many folks who are in this room who wrote their first lines of GraphQL perhaps years ago probably followed that outside-in adoption pattern. Like we're in a product team, we're building an experience, maybe set up a GraphQL service within their organization or something like that. And then later on, perhaps if you're using Federation in your shop, you ended up, as more teams adopted GraphQL, you ended up bringing order to that proliferation inside. But I think these are two distinct motions, and they mean different things for folks who are adopting GraphQL clients and building new product experiences with them. And so I want to just tease this out a little bit more before we get into the next part of the talk. So this product-led adoption, outside in, this is kind of what I'm used to. Perhaps this resonates with all of you. A team inside an organization gets curious about GraphQL. Maybe one person used it at their last job. They think it's great. They want to use it here at this job. Maybe they do a proof of concept with a low-risk feature and then go deeper from there. The product team itself ends up owning the whole thing, from the UI, perhaps even to the BFF code base. And eventually their success incentivizes other teams in the org to adopt GraphQL. But note that it's being led by the passion and enthusiasm for those in those product engineering teams. The proliferation of GraphQL services often culminates in a federated graph, which is the pattern that, for example, MLB chose. And this is why I refer to product-led adoption as sort of outside in. GraphQL reaches that UI and product team first, then becomes a platform consideration later. But there's a new trend. Companies are adopting GraphQL, oftentimes through Federation, at the heart of their data platforms on day one. It's not necessarily being driven by web and mobile application developers who are passionate about the tech. Instead, GraphQL is increasingly interpreted as a solution to the problem of API sprawl. In this model, the platform engineers might get their hands on GraphQL first. And this is a new beast. And where the rubber hits the road is in kind of the timeline bit. Platform initiatives are often more rigid in their commitment to certain cost savings or getting into production X months from now, right? And that puts pressure. It means the product teams they serve will be walking a different path. They didn't necessarily choose GraphQL for themselves. It was chosen for them. And that's not a bad thing. Remember, we all happily learned QWERTY and use it for our entire lives. It works. But if you're starting a GraphQL production rollout while learning the tooling, that will present a challenge. It's a challenge that you can meet and thrive in, by the way. Because we're often dealing with time pressure. Get into production by this date. Get this many features migrated before Black Friday. To keep pace with their platform, they need champions. So that's all preamble. We're up to speed on GraphQL clients, adoption patterns, and that all feeds into my core thesis. New GraphQL users need a new playbook for success that takes into account the platform-led adoption model. Here are a few ideas, and they're pretty high level, but that's more to account for the fact that the use cases for GraphQL are so wide and so diverse. Effective championing of a GraphQL client means giving your teams what they need at each stage: crawl, walk, run. Now, it's tempting to interpret this to mean beginner, intermediate, and advanced, but that's not quite right. If you're the one trying to make decisions on behalf of a team or a platform, you should know roughly where your organization is on this continuum. Let's begin with run. I'm sorry, is this big enough? And are y'all able to read this in the back? I apologize. I'm seeing a thumbs up in the back, but I'm also seeing some shaking heads. I'm sorry if, I don't know if I can zoom in here or not. But I apologize. But the slides are available in Sched as well. So if you're having trouble seeing, I apologize. And you should be able to bring it up on your device as well. Before that is walk. Or did I, wait, I clicked it. OK, here we are. Yes, let's begin with run. If your application teams are running with GraphQL, that means they have multiple deployments in production, probably. They're leveraging the full extent of the GraphQL language and the capabilities of the client libraries they've chosen. There's probably a GraphQL guild or group in the organization that is run by a champion, perhaps yourselves. And basically, the organization is able to fully mobilize their GraphQL client to drive business value. Before that is walk. A team that's walking could be in production with GraphQL, but the bulk of their traffic perhaps could be on legacy systems. The migration process might still be slow and deliberative, and their teams running GraphQL could be well-versed, but they also may still be underutilizing their GraphQL client. Teams that walk or run generally have more ways to self-serve. They have figured out enough about their use case that they can procure educational resources, documentation, vendor solutions, consultants, whatever. It's kind of like known unknowns. And I don't want to ignore them for this talk, but to be candid, I think the community is generally serving these folks fairly well, particularly the teams that are walking, right? We can take them and work with them because they usually know at least how to form questions around what their team is doing and try to find the solutions and engage with folks in the community. At these stages, the champion's role is to sort of direct traffic, right? Taking inquiries and business problems from these teams and connecting them with the right abstraction or people. But it's this group, the crawlers, that are sort of invisible to the broader community. And they need champions more than anybody. Sure, you want to tell them what a query is and mutation is, right? Like basic GraphQL education. But the more interesting questions they have are far less deterministic, far less cut and dry. A team that's in the crawl stage has not yet even figured out how to get their current front ends onto the graph. They ask important but highly contextual questions like, how do I gradually migrate my iOS app from our legacy API to GraphQL with Apollo iOS CodeGen or something like that? And the answers aren't always clear. It's often like, it depends. And a champion is somebody who's working with them to look critically at all the internal and external factors and help chart a course into production. Now, it's a long road. If you want to be that person, that champion for your application development teams, this is where your involvement will have the most impact. And I have a few strategies for you that I've seen work. First, take stock of what you will be supporting. Do you have mobile apps, web apps? How many? What languages are used? This might seem like a no-brainer, but trust me, some folks in larger organizations might have to roll up their sleeves to get straight answers to all of these questions. You need to know what it looks like to have 100% of your applications on GraphQL, even if you don't plan to ever get there. Just know what that ceiling is. Talking to your developers. Everybody nods when I say this. Like, yeah, of course, talk to the other teams, of course. But it's hard, right? It is hard. There's a reason why people don't talk enough. And I'm not sure how to explain it, but we all kind of know. People get busy, right? Surveys, interviews, these are all tools in your tool shed that should be used more often than you think. Figure out who's used GraphQL and prod in an org before. Assess their sentiment, right? Who are your promoters? Who are the folks that didn't have such a good experience? Why is that? Start building that Rolodex of folks who already have the familiarity with what we're trying to do. At the same time, you also want to take a critical look at your business, right? Find that intersection between business value and team fit. Look at your list of production apps or experiences. Look at where your team's GraphQL experience and enthusiasm are, and try to anticipate that ideal first use case, a pilot, if you will. There are a lot of GraphQL clients out there. I'm not here to tell you which one to choose. Your developers have preferences, they have opinions, they might not all even align. Surface those differences in philosophy early, resolve diplomatically. This is my take on the old Linux meme about building your own birthday cake. My one piece of advice that I universally recommend, however, is not to let your application teams roll their own in-house GraphQL client. It's almost always way more trouble than it's worth. You want that energy going into your business domain. And don't neglect browser extensions and IDE plugins. That's part of the puzzle here, too. So once you've identified those folks who are going to be on your side, once you've identified your first use case, that's a good time to take a look at what client tooling you'll be using. Getting evangelists early. This is also important. Don't just find the experts or the folks that have experience with GraphQL. Get the folks who love demos. Like those folks who do show up at your companies like show and tell events or the hackathons, the ones who are always sharing screen grabs of like the 2 minutes that they show in their editor and are showing you how it's going, developing their feature. Those are the folks that you want to get on your side early. They might not be the domain experts right away, but teach them. Pair them up with the domain experts too, and have them be on your side. It is absolutely a tailwind. Don't think engineering here. Think developer relations, and those might come in the same person or might not be, and that's fine. Be Remington, basically. And then from there, harness that energy. Make those guerrilla screen shares. Show your progress on your GraphQL rollout. Share milestones on your pilot programs and everything like that. It will pay off, and it will help up-level your team. Developer education is a huge part of this. Make a wiki page with learning resources. Point to both internal documentation and external documentation for the tooling that you're using. There's plenty out there. And if you need help kind of connecting the dots, Apollo Odyssey is free. It's a learning platform, has a lot of great beginner, intermediate, and advanced content for a lot of GraphQL resources. So whether you're using internal or external resources or a combination of both, that's a huge part of the picture that you're going to want folks to sink their teeth into. For this one, I'll also say, read the GraphQL spec. Anybody read it cover to cover? Yeah. I'm not surprised at some of the hands that are coming up. That's cool. Book club time. Start a GraphQL reading group in your organization. The spec is actually not that long, and it's great bedtime reading. You might be surprised at what you learn, all the vocabulary that doesn't quite make its way into educational materials because it's a little arcane, but it's really not that bad. And come to a working group meeting, too. It couldn't be easier. It's all, the process is there on GitHub. I know we'll welcome you in. Benji will welcome you in, and we'll make it work. Just if you're not sure how you'd contribute, taking notes is always welcome, or just going in and saying hello to people and taking it all in and seeing if it's for you. If you're working with a vendor, take advantage of the solutions and success folks that you're interacting with on a day-to-day too. They've seen a lot and are here to help and are usually underutilized. So if you're working with somebody, definitely give them a call if you haven't talked to them in a while. And expect some pain points. I'm going to read these out because I realize that the font might be a little small. Working with the norm, so these are like just some common kind of pressure points that our team has seen folks use when they're adopting GraphQL clients at different points. On the web side, working with the normalized cache. Bundle phobia, just the idea of getting over the fact that you're, those initial bytes over the wire are getting paid for many times over by that caching layer. RESTQL is this kind of catch-all term I've heard used to describe folks who kind of want to do a drop-in replacement when they're migrating to GraphQL, and they kind of make queries that are too big and aren't leveraging the full kind of GraphQL paradigm, and so they're just kind of making it kind of resty at first. It's hard to explain, but you know it when you see it. Parsing the difference between network and GraphQL errors, which is different, and pagination. And on the mobile side, similar things. Transitioning to generated models, like CodeGen specifically, is sometimes a culture shift inside an organization, and it's not always clear when to migrate or how to migrate, right? And dealing with that kind of resulting binary size delta. Dealing with breaking schema changes gracefully, right? Especially when a team that's still getting set up with GraphQL, it's planning that over time. Graph ownership mentality, mobile engineers making them feel empowered to use the tooling and to take a look at the schema and feel like they can suggest changes and things like that. Nullability, this idea of just state navigation through nullability and how to express that, especially as nullability is being revisited in the GraphQL specification now, although we're at the early stages of that. And pagination. How do you express pagination? Are you going to use cursor-based pagination like relay, or are you going to just do a traditional offset-based? All of these different things, just look out for and kind of start building your answer Rolodex, because you might already have those, but you might not, and that's okay. Now's the time to start figuring it out. With your use cases identified, your brain trust selected, and your resources in one place, your team is well positioned. That's my crash course on how you can champion GraphQL to your application teams. Maybe later on we can meet up and you can tell me kind of what you've seen and what I might have missed here, but we are running up against time, and I did want to talk a little bit about those walkers and runners, and a little bit about how the Apollo clients team really learns about how to meet users where they're at. So I'm going to have to do a speed run through this, but I hope that you'll check out some of the things that we're going to be talking about here. Our client libraries operate on GitHub, first and foremost. I know that I'm sure many, if not all of you, are familiar with this. Issues, pull requests, these are all really important sources of feedback for us. We get a ton of it every day. They give us a pulse on the hotspots and are really great ways to understand where user friction's coming in. It's not a great source, though, of understanding what's working for people. It's usually when things aren't working that we kind of get these popped up, and that's okay. It's important. We also make use of RSCs in particular because they've been a great resource for ourselves and our users. They help us validate concepts in full view of our users. We have several out there right now across our different open source repos, one for Swift 6 and Apollo iOS. Check that out. We have one for data masking and Apollo Client. Alessia, I think is yours still open for schema-driven testing as well?
That one eventually got
Yeah, it did get closer. Okay, there you go. But it was really helpful to have. Our maintainers are active in the Apollo Discord and forums. We engage regularly with the folks who are out in the field too. And these sort of Q&A interactions are another way that we kind of surface documentation gaps and opportunities to build features. We put on the hazmat suits sometimes for social media, but honestly, we do get some good exchanges on there that kind of get us thinking and figuring out how to build. Getting out there in conferences and events like this one. We show up at a lot of conferences as much as we can. This is a crucial feedback avenue. We started doing user interviews. That's been really great to have like a longer conversation with folks. It's remarkable, though not surprising in hindsight, how many irreplaceable insights you get from talking directly to a user for an hour and really picking their brains. We actually are in need of mobile developers, and in particularly Apollo iOS users. To talk to them, we have some questions about developer tooling that are top of mind. So if you are one or work with one or know one, please let me know. Love to get your information and sit down with you for a little bit. And in our READMEs and in our automated flows, we ask users to complete like a really short NPS-like survey. We get a few responses a week. We read them all and truly appreciate them. And a lot of stuff pops in here that we wouldn't otherwise have gotten in an issue or a PR. And we get aggregate information piped into our Slack organization too. So we always get tapped on the shoulder. And we get to see like what's out there, right? What we still need to reply to, things like that. And so it's a really wonderful way to kind of get a high-level overview of the work that we have ahead of us and who's tapping us on the shoulder about what. And so those surveys, I want to call out Calvin, my colleague, for making those, and Alessia for championing this particular flow of getting all that data piped into Slack so that our team can find those needles in the haystack for sure. We're in this awkward middle phase right now where we have all the elements that people need for success in GraphQL. We have plenty of work to do in order to bring people along with us. Just how Remington brought people onto the QWERTY layout, we need to connect the good ideas with the time-bound urgencies that platform teams place on product teams. And that takes championing at every stage of the journey. Crawl, walk, run, and then fly. I hope some of the ideas I shared today resonated, and I'd like to invite questions or conversation from all of you, but it'll have to be kind of in the hallway or something like that, so come find me. I'll be hanging out at the Apollo booth and around the conference all the time. And yeah, that's my talk, so thanks for showing up. Appreciate it.